Well, folks, the media is out there. They're starting to build a brand new narrative. It's shiny and new, and it's all about how Disney is not as dismal as you thought. No! Indiana Jones, The Dial of Destiny, Elemental, The Little Mermaid, Ant-Man Quantumania, they're just part of a bigger change inside the culture. People don't want to go see movies anymore. Yes, The Flash did not do well, and they're trying to say now that Mission Impossible is part of the pattern as well. There's just a few big problems, and we'll discuss them right now. All right, folks, welcome back to another beautiful day here on the WDW Pro channel. We indeed genuinely hope that your day is beautiful as well. If it isn't, hang in there. Blue skies tend to come back eventually. Joining me to help us have a blue sky kind of day today is Odin of OMB Reviews and Valiant Renegade of Valiant Renegade Incorporated at Valiant Renegade. Gentlemen, welcome back.
Thanks for having us.
All right, folks, as we dive into this conversation about the box office and what is happening across Western society, a small topic, I know, you might consider clicking the like button, share, subscribe, and when you click it, you stick it to the algorithms. It is indeed the notification bell. All right, we begin our journey today with a tweet out of Eric H. at Final E33. And Eric probably is great at everything that he says, but I looked at this tweet that he's put out, a little bit over 11,000 views, and I just thought this was a good starting point, a place for us to jump into the conversation. And here's part of what this larger narrative is beginning to say. When the Flash movie and Indiana Jones underperformed domestically, people blamed a host of factors, all of which made sense as to why the box office numbers were low. In the case of The Flash, by the way, folks, that's because Ezra Miller is a nut job, and Indiana Jones, The Dial of Destiny is an incredibly poorly made film. Anyway, however, with Mission Impossible underperforming domestically as well, I think it proves that people just aren't going to the movies like they used to pre-COVID, and they're much more willing to wait the 45 days to watch films from the privacy of their own home, or privacy for those of you out there who are prestigious. Before anyone brings up Top Gun Maverick, that movie was a nostalgia-based sequel 30 years in the making and was still early post-pandemic when not all forms of entertainment were open. Now, gentlemen, I find this to be an intriguing starting point for the conversation. A couple of things just to kick us off here, right? We have seen Polarity at a level that I have not ever seen before in the box office. What I mean by that is we have seen huge successes, and we have seen absolute bombs, and very little in the middle. And that's what's strange, right? Mm-hmm. And so you've got movies like The Flash, you've got movies like Elemental, which just crash and burn. At the same time, we're watching as movies like Super Mario Brothers and Avatar: The Way of Water set historic records. So I don't know that I'm buying into this idea that people suddenly don't want to go to the movies. And I also don't necessarily buy into this premise that Mission Impossible is performing in a way that suggests that people want to stay home. The way that I look at this, then Odin, I want to start with you, but the way I look at this is I fully expected Mission Impossible to be the biggest movie of the summer. I fully expected it was going to be similar to what we saw out of Top Gun Maverick. And then based on the early reviews I was reading, I thought, well, this is absolutely how it's going to play out. What changed was when I saw the movie. And when I saw the movie, I said, well, this is good, but it's not great. It's a 7, right? And the problem with a 7 is that you don't get that same kind of explosive excitement that we saw out of Top Gun Maverick, which is very close to a 10. So, Odin, what do you make of this argument? Do you think that society, the West, is now tired of going to theaters and just wants to see it on their 85-inch TVs at home?
It's a bit of a yes and no. I think that we could absolutely have to admit that the movie-going habits ever since COVID have been broken. And this is something that is, again, a fact. We can absolutely look at the data, we can look at the numbers, and we can see that movie-going overall has dropped quite a bit. It was already going down prior to the pandemic, but it has obviously gone down quite a bit since that time. But we also know that there have been several films that have been able to not only break $1 billion, but have also even been profitable. So we know that people are going out to see movies. It's just that they're only going out to see a few types of movies. And those are movies that are going to either, one, entertain them, right? So films that are marketed very well to be entertaining. Two, typically they are well-made movies that are, again, well thought out, well crafted, well put together. And then really three are films that have been maybe part of a franchise a long time coming, right? So Top Gun Maverick, one could say, is part of that, right? 30 years in the making, you could argue, etc. We can look at those as being these examples. And so even though we are absolutely seeing some movies, right, especially in the case of Disney, with bloated budgets, completely destroy themselves at the box office, we're also still seeing that there are these other films that are being out there. And I think Mission Impossible is actually one of them. And it's interesting to hear this argument now of people trying to basically put Mission Impossible in with all of the Disney failures as of late, because if you look at the numbers, and this is something that I know I make a point on my channel, if you look at the actual box office history, you start to recognize that what's going on with Mission Impossible is not anything close to what we have seen with these other box office flops. And in fact, people might try to argue that it's a disappointment domestically. I would say right now, it's actually looking just fine. It's not matching up to the projections for sure, but guess what? Those projections are based on a model that had almost no data to go with. How many 5-day opening non-holiday frames are there on record? I honestly can't think of another one off the top of my head. But that is a very key factor, right? That's what this is what all this is based on. They only make these projections based on trends and history. And if you have no history and you have the same trends, then guess what? Your numbers are going to be off probably. And so what we're seeing right now, I think, is still, again, is it amazing? Is it the biggest opening ever? No. Is it healthy for a Mission Impossible film, especially as of right now? Yeah, everything's looking fine. Week 2, if we see massive drop-offs, then we can start having that conversation. But as of right now, things are looking okay.
So, Odin, let me push back, and I want to do this before we go to Valiant because I don't want to let this moment escape us.
Yeah.
I want to see what you do with this idea and you play with it a bit. One of the things that I think is going on here, I'm not sure that it comes down to what types of movies are being put forth to the public. Rather, I think that it has to do with the content and whether or not it makes audiences angry. So let me give you 2 examples. We've got the Minions movie that came out last year. The budget's tiny. And it nearly breaks $1 billion. Maybe it has by now. I haven't checked in a while. That's not a remarkable movie, in my opinion. And yet, it did what it did. Puss in Boots, okay, part of the Shrek franchise. The Shrek franchise is largely dormant. Of course, now they're going to try to resurrect it off of that success. But Puss in Boots, sitting there on streaming, and people are still going to see the movie. It's outperforming Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Now, again, not a remarkable movie, I don't think. I'm not trying to disparage it, but I think there's something to be said right now that families and perhaps moderates and conservatives have exited the theaters and said, we're not going unless we know that if we show up, that you're not going to, rub all of this modern, postmodern value system in our faces and make us have uncomfortable conversations with our children. What do you make of that argument?
No, I think it's an interesting one for sure. I think that, you're seeing this a lot with Disney because Disney has been very vocal, has been very public about their intentions to try to brainwash children. I mean, they've basically come out and said the quiet part out loud.
Not so secret agenda.
I know, right? Yeah. Not so secret agenda. And so they've made that very clear. And I've mentioned this on my channel a lot, that if you go back to Lightyear and you go back to why did that film fail so much, a lot of it, I think, has to do with the fact that Disney became very publicly involved with Florida and with the Florida legislation that was being passed about this very thing, and all the videos coming out around the same time, too. And so a lot of families, I think, said, okay, yeah, I don't really think I want to bring my kid to this. But I do still think that the movies themselves being good plays a factor, because in the cases that you mentioned with Minions or with the case of Puss in Boots, yes, those are films that are really nothing special. Like, there's nothing amazing about them, but I can't tell you how many people came back and said Minions was a lot of fun, or how many people came back and said Puss in Boots is actually a lot of fun and probably one of the best films that I've seen this year, right? They're not saying that it's, these amazing classics that are going to stand the test of time. It's just that they had good word of mouth, right? That actual genuine word of mouth. And I think that is ultimately what now makes or breaks movies. We're seeing that with Sound of Freedom. We're seeing it with so many other these movies. I think we are going to start to see it with Mission Impossible too. I just think that it's right now a little too early for us to see those metrics. And also, some people tend to forget that it is an international franchise that's going to skew much more heavily internationally than domestically.
Yeah, and I think too, this writer's strike and this actor's strike, I think that the entire industry has misunderstood their place in the public eye. And I say that because when you're talking about films such as Minions and Puss in Boots just being fun, and that's enough for audiences to show up in droves, it really speaks to the issue that we have where writers and distributors and studios largely refuse to give audiences fun movies. They don't even have to be masterpieces. They just have to be fun. Mm-hmm. Now, Valiant, the argument that's being made across the media, this is the new push, is that Disney is not targeted because this is happening to so many other movies. And they're now using Mission Impossible and this supposed weak start domestically as the crux of their argument. So Valiant, walk us through financially how vastly different are Indiana Jones: The Dial of Destiny and Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1 in where they will wind up, profitability, break even, etc. How different are these two films?
Very. And look, everything that Odin said, in the last few minutes, 100% agree with. The comparison between these is just not there. Not when you look at real numbers, and not even talking about a 5-day non-holiday opening weekend. Just talk about it from the standpoint of the barrier to entry for Mission Impossible versus, say, a Top Gun is very different. Top Gun Maverick was a self-contained film versus somebody that's going to see, well, I love Tom Cruise and I love the action and I love all the promos for this, but this is the 7th entry. I haven't seen maybe some of the other movies. Sometimes that is an issue with it, and we've had a lot of people that have seemingly guided towards the fact that they have delayed or deferred their viewing of the movie because they wanted to go see a PLF screen, and they couldn't get into where they wanted to go in the opening weekend. All of that factors in. Things like Puss in Boots and Minions, while very successful at the box office, and this is what's even crazier, these are not zeitgeist-driving films. They're good films, as Odin said. He's totally correct. But they're not moving the needle. Top Gun Maverick had a move the needle kind of moment. I don't know if Mission Impossible is going to get to that point, and I've never thought that Mission Impossible was going to reach the heights of $1 billion, $4 billion, $5 billion that Maverick did. But I think it can still do very well. But as Odin correctly pointed out, the international market for MI has always been much bigger. One of the biggest international markets, if not this time around, potentially with China softening, the biggest international market, Japan, is still about 6 days away from opening as of right now, or 4 days away, 5 days away from opening. So that's going to be a big market for it. Japan is a huge Tom Cruise market. Mission Impossible movies tend to leg out. Mission Impossible Fallout, the last entry in 2018, legged out to about a 3.5, if not mistaken, or somewhere in that vicinity. So with an $80 million or $78 million opening 5 days, that's fine. That's how this movie is roughly expected to perform. We have to see how it goes into this week and into next weekend and so on and so forth. And maybe even not measuring it simply by next weekend, because Barbie and Oppenheimer will be very competitive forces. I've said for weeks that I think this coming weekend, here in about 4 days, when this thing opens, this could potentially be the biggest or one of the biggest total box office weekends of the entire year. We could be looking at a $200 million weekend. They're talking about Barbie with 100 plus. They're talking about Oppenheimer with 50. I think Mission Impossible could easily hang in with 30 to 40 this weekend. Plus, you've still got Sound of Freedom out there. This is not a one and done. And again, as we stated, the international box office for MI, just like Fast and Furious and a lot of these other things, that's where the bank is made. Not to mention the fact that Mission Impossible movies, Skydance partnership, Paramount, these things have huge shelf lives after the theater in terms of financial perspective. They still have huge PVOD windows. They're much more traditionally windowed in that regard, whereas Disney consumes everything onto Disney Plus. Massive global footprint, no third-party licensing out there internationally. Although, as I've stated before, I found it very interesting that The Little Mermaid recently was announced. It was basically going to have like a solid 1 to 2 months of PVOD window before it went to physical media. And then they haven't even announced the Disney Plus date yet after PVOD or after physical media, which comes out in September. So Disney is figuring out that we're leaving too much money on the table and we're dying in the theater. We can't keep this up. Things like Tom Cruise movies already know this. This is why Cruise fights for this traditional windowing, because they know that the big bucks, get done downline after it leaves the theater. And as long as studios and distributors continue to go that route, they will be fine, provided that, as y'all stipulated, there's actually a good movie. And that's the biggest problem. It's not that people are avoiding theaters because of, they've changed their behavior patterns and all this kind of stuff. No, it's a bad movie fatigue. You can't use the excuse of we don't want to go to the theaters anymore when Spider-Man No Way Home rakes in $1.8 billion, when Avatar rakes in $2.3 billion, when Tom Cruise and Top Gun Maverick rakes in $1.50 globally. Sorry, no. Mario Brothers, 1.3, Minions, almost $1 billion, so on and so forth. It's not there. People will go to the theaters and pay good money to see good movies. Look at Sound of Freedom, which had nothing behind it except word of mouth. And it's about to cross 100 mil. Just in the U.S. market alone.
Much to their chagrin, by the way. They're not too happy about that.
Yeah.
But let's take a look at this article out of Fox Business. This says Tom Cruise's Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 takes in $235 million in the first 5 days. This by Aslan Murphy. About $80 million of Dead Reckoning box office sales were domestic. And here's what it says. Box office data has come in for the first 5 days since Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 debuted to moviegoers. The Christopher McQuarrie directed film bringing actor Tom Cruise back as spy Ethan Hunt for the 7th time saw a global box office gross of $235 in the 5-day time span from July 12th to Sunday, according to data from IMDb site Box Office Mojo. That figure includes roughly $80 million that reportedly came from domestic ticket sales and $155 million from international. Now, here's what I'm interested in, gentlemen, and I'll hand it to both of you to figure this out for me. But Indiana Jones: The Dial of Destiny looks to me like it's going to close out at about $350. Does that sound right to both of you?
Mm-hmm. That's what I've been saying. Yeah.
And then here's what's going to happen with Indy. Correct me again if I'm wrong. Indy goes to Disney Plus, and that's it. There may be some very minor physical media sales. I doubt it because there's been very minor box office sales. So, well, that stands to reason, right? Mm-hmm. So it goes to Disney Plus, and it makes no more money, and that's it. It's over, and it sits at $350, and it needed about $900 million, give or take, to make a profit. Okay, now I'm looking at Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning, and I'm seeing let's say that it legs out at 3 times, right? Mm-hmm. It started off at $250. That would take it to $750. It also probably needs 900 to make a break-even point. Is that fair?
It's in there, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But here's the difference, and correct me if I'm wrong. This is going to go to streaming services where there's money to be had, right? So walk me through the difference then, how Disney has set this up where they don't get any money versus what's happening here with the Tom Cruise endeavor. Why is it making money after the box office and therefore may not be a failure?
It really comes down to the fact that these physical media sales do matter quite a bit. And Tom Cruise, I think, is a great example. I'm actually happy that this is a Mission Impossible film that we're talking about with Tom Cruise, because there's another little film that he did not too many years ago that only ever got greenlit for a sequel and only ever had a life and actually made its money back because of the physical media market. And that was Live, Die, Repeat, Edge of Tomorrow. That film was not a box office hit. That film lost money at the box office, but because the marketing was so bad for that movie, people didn't go to see it. But then when the people did see it, when it did come out on Blu-ray and 4K, people said, this film is great. Why did no one talk about this?
I love that movie, by the way.
I know, right? And so clearly there is a lot of money there. And so Tom Cruise, as you said, right, knows this very, very well. He understands this market. He was one of the few voices. I would say the 2 top voices pushing, especially for theaters, as far as the passion, I would say Tom Cruise and Christopher Nolan. Like, those are, to me, the 2 biggest voices saying theatrical has to be the way forward, and it's the only way that we're going to be able to save our industry. And also, they're the 2 people that actually want to entertain. They actually people who want to be able to provide something different, something unique that you can only ever experience in a theater. So I look at these numbers and I think, okay, some people are going to try to argue, well, they have very similar budgets, Dial of Destiny and Mission Impossible. They seem like, okay, they're going to make different amounts of money, but best case scenario right now, looking at the numbers, seems Mission Impossible is going to not quite get to what the typical break even might be. But the other factor that they're not bringing into this, I think that is such an important factor, is go ahead and look at the last movie that came out, Fallout. All right, I talked about this on my channel. $156 million was a global opening for that movie. Okay, even if you adjust for inflation, that brings it up to about 190. So you're still talking about a $40+ million advantage that this movie currently has over that one. And obviously, we do have to take into account right, the different openings, right, the domestic 5-day opening that this movie has had, that Dead Reckoning Part 1 has had. And again, that is a factor there, but it is still important to mention just the facts alone of the numbers. Okay, that means that at worst case scenario, if you move some numbers around, this movie is performing like a typical movie. And guess what? If you adjust for inflation, what did Fallout make? 900 plus million. So you're seeing this movie performing as well, and I would argue better than what you saw the global opening of Fallout be. And that tells me that, again, I think $1 billion is still on the table. It's not a guarantee, but it's still on the table. And I think that we're going to see a lot of play coming up the next couple of weeks.
Walk us through the streaming side of this, too, in your answer.
Yeah, I was going to say, just real quick, to add on to what Odin said, all completely correct. But just to give people a bit of perspective, the Chinese box office open for Fallout was something like 70 million. The open for this in China was 24, 25, sharply lower, but yet still look comparatively to the total global open. And again, back in 2018, exactly. In the 2018 version, I think Japan opened concurrently in a unified opening. Did not open here. So again, this is why I look at this and I say this is fine. And compared to Indiana Jones, let's be real. Mission Impossible, we're talking about $235 million after 5 days. That is $65 million, $67 million less than Indiana Jones has done in 17 days. That's the difference right there. That's a massive difference. That is a magnitudinal order of difference in terms of performance. Being a little facetious, obviously, but you get the point. These are not comparative metrics between these two.
Well, let's just throw this number out. Mm-hmm. So, Indiana Jones: The Dial of Destiny probably going to end at 350.
Yep.
Based on what you guys are saying, based on the data that we have from this franchise, Mission Impossible, this thing probably winds up somewhere around 950. Okay, that's a $600 million difference.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this idea that these are comparable, these are apples and oranges. They're vastly different in terms of success.
Mission Impossible will be well over 350 by the end of this second weekend, globally. No question. Yeah. And that's the difference, right? We're talking about Indiana Jones' total run. Maybe it squirrels up to 350. After 10, 11 days, 12 days, or whatever, Mission Impossible is going to be past that mark. That's a big difference. And they had very similar budgets, between the two of them. And again, the difference when you ask about streaming and post-theatrical. So that's where the big variance comes in. As I mentioned earlier, Disney Plus, to their own detriment at this point, because they're still losing a cruise ship per quarter on DTC, about $1 billion a quarter. Pro, you and I have talked about this.
We'll talk about it again in August, no doubt, because we'll have that
August 9th coming up fast.
The next report on your channel.
Disney has a global footprint. Disney Plus exists in Japan, in Korea, in Australia, all across Western Europe, all across South America. What is the footprint of Paramount Plus? Virtually nowhere. So even if even if Mission Impossible winds up on Paramount Plus, which it will, and they will pay Skydance a handsome fee to be able to do that. And Tom Cruise, obviously, we know factually now, still has gross points on these things. That man's walking away making bank. He made almost $200 million, as best as I can tell, from Top Gun Maverick. But with this movie, same situation. But unlike Disney Plus, Paramount, when they put it on their streaming service, they're going to have to license it out to a streamer in Japan, in Korea, somewhere else. They're going to get actual third-party revenue. Cash money is going to be rolling in for this movie.
I'm sure they just hate that.
I know they hate it.
Money.
Just like Sony said, we ain't doing this streaming stuff. We'd rather take the $1 billion check from Netflix. People ask about, the Woman King bombed at the box office, but based on its budget. And that's true, but Sony kind of don't care because Netflix wrote the check for it. Same thing with some of these other ones that they've come out with where they didn't do that well at the box office, but at the end of the day, Netflix basically wrote the check for it, kind of like they did for Star Trek Discovery when Paramount was making that. Check out Midnight's Edge. They can tell you that whole story. This is no different. So getting into the box office, and this is the bottom line, getting into the box office, there is no better way to create a buzz or saleability for a film, for a movie, than going out in the theater. Even if it's not a blockbuster, quote unquote, right? You don't need a blockbuster. Things like Elf made way more money after the theater, Christmas Vacation, all that kind of stuff. Billions more after they left the theater, literally over time, over 20, 30 years in those cases. There's so many movies that are like that. Think of the Adam Sandler movies, how much money they made I'm talking about like Billy Madison, OG stuff, Happy Gilmore. Those movies have made 10
as a Louisiana
times
guy,
more
the
money.
fact that you left out Waterboy just hurts.
Well, I get to
it just hurts.
Waterboy has made 10, 15, 20 times, 100 times more money after the theaters.
It's the devil.
Yeah, I mean, it's the devil, Bobby. The devil. But that's the point. Hollywood is realizing now, they're all starting to figure this out. The whole streaming thing, with the way they've been doing this, doesn't work. They can make it work, but they can't abandon and collapse all the windows. Pro, you and I were together last year on that first Faded earnings call where David Zaslav marched in for the first time ever as a Warner Brothers CEO, and him and his crew, JB Perrette and all these guys, were like, this whole idea about collapsing the entire theatrical window into streaming is stupid. And they actually used the word stupid on the earnings call. They just called it out. I mean, this is why Jason Kilar was the first guy fired when Zaslav came in.
And the journalists had no idea what to make of it either. They were
didn't.
flummoxed.
Hashtag Zaslav was right. And everybody else in Hollywood now is figuring this out. You have to still have that post-theatrical revenue, the PVOD windowing. Now like last year, I told everybody, I bought Top Gun Maverick the moment it hit PVOD. I already had my 4K Blu-ray on pre-order for months, but I didn't feel like waiting 6 more weeks to watch it. So I paid $20 for the PVOD, and then they got my $25 again 6 weeks later for the physical media. I wanted the movie.
And that's what Disney used to do. Disney used to do all of these
the vault.
Special
Mike
cuts would come
Eisner,
out, these new editions, they would upscale it, they would add some new feature to get people to buy these things over and over and over, these redundancies they would build into the market. Odin, I want to go to you for the last word here. We're going into this strike, of course. It is day 6, I suppose, of the writer's strike, the Hollywood strike, the actor strike, and day 6 of America not really caring. But Odin, on the backside of this, when we finally come out of it, give us the pitch. What is it that audiences want to see out of movies that apparently some of these studios just can't get right? What should they do?
What we want to be entertained. Again, that's the whole point of movies. Movies are about escape. One of the reasons why I have been going to the theater as often as I have for many, many years, going back all the way to high school, is because it was a way to escape. It was a way to enter into a new world. And there are so few filmmakers left today. I feel like there's like only maybe a handful or two that you could honestly think about that are honestly still making stories that you actually want to see. You have people like Christopher Nolan. You have people like Tarantino. Right now, I would argue that you have people even like Christopher McQuarrie as well with Mission Impossible, telling stories where, with actors like Tom Cruise saying, hey, we want to make a movie for the fans. We want to make a movie for audiences. And what they need to do and what they need to figure out is, how do we get these ideologues out of the writing rooms? How do we get them out of the director's chair? How do we get them out of the producer's chair, in fact? And how do we instead get people who are pro-audience, pro-consumer, and how do we get people that are actually trying to make something that people can grasp onto, whether it's a part of a franchise, whether it's a brand new idea? Just find a way to entertain. Because as Top Gun Maverick last year, I think it's a great film to continue to bring up, because what that film showed is that even after 30 years, the reason why the film did well is not because people were like, I can't wait to see a Top Gun sequel. No, it's because Tom Cruise and the marketing team were like, no, we need to make this movie for the people who not only want to see a sequel to this story about Maverick, but also just want to see a kick-ass movie. And that's exactly what they gave, and that's why audiences responded in droves, and that's why I think, bringing this back to Mission Impossible, again, after 2 weeks, Top Gun Maverick was over $500 million worldwide, because it had massive holes all across. I don't think we're going to see similar holes for this movie in Mission Impossible, but if we even see something close to it, you can see the film get close to $500 million after 2 weeks, and if that happens, then we start to have that conversation of, okay, now it's starting to get real, now it's starting to make it feel like this movie might end up being good. But again, what they need to do, give audiences something to be entertained by and to laugh at. I think that's really the only way to bring out any audiences back.
Amen.
Imagine that, folks. Give the consumer what the consumer wants. and they might come back again to consume more of your product. I cannot believe it.
It's crazy.
Folks, I'll tell you another thing that's amazing is you might come back for more conversations such as this, and we are blessed each and every single time that you do. But I want to recommend that you go check out OMB Reviews. Odin is over there. Valiant Renegade, of course, on his own Valiant Renegade channel. The links to their channels in the description down below this video. If you enjoy quality, such as what you've just received in this conversation, and we hope you did, they have more and more for you of this same variety. Well, folks, if you liked it, click the like button, share, subscribe, and when you click it, you stick it to the algorithms. It is the notification bell. The conversation here has come to a conclusion, but the commentary begins. Drop your comments down below. Tell us what you think. We cover your comments. We care, and we do read them and often respond. And wherever you are, whatever you're doing, keep learning, keep growing, and keep having fun.
Make sure to catch The Pro Show Thursdays 5 to 7 Eastern Time. Entertainment Explained, The Culture Curve Conquered, live with Pro and all his friends.